evening. I'd like to call to order this meeting for the Parks and Recreation Commission on November 28th, 2017. Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, welcome again, and if you haven't already, please put your cell phones either off or in airplane mode. Thank you. And roll call of the commissioner members.
Let the record show that all commissioners are present except for the excused absence of Commissioners Gould and Commissioners Hale.
Okay. We'll move on to consent calendar. And has everyone had an opportunity to look over the minutes? Mm-hmm. So do we need a motion for that to approve the minutes?
We wanted
Make a motion?
I'll motion to approve the minutes from July.
I'll second the motion.
Okay.
Okay.
Roll call.
Noska,
Here.
Gorley,
Aye. Oh, aye.
Nordum,
Up to pass.
Martinez,
Aye.
and Cornwell.
Abstain.
Okay, we are off to a really great start.
We need a separate motion for September,
Yep, another.
Okay.
for the minutes of
Actually,
September.
that's the one I thought we were doing, so can I change mine to abstain for
Yes.
July? Thank you, because I was gone. All right, so for September minutes, do we have a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes for September.
I'll second the motion.
Okay.
All right, Noska,
Aye.
Gorley,
I have to abstain on that.
Nordum,
Abstain.
Martinez,
Yes.
and Cornwell.
Abstain.
Okay,
So I think we look at those again the next meeting.
I know. Ceremonies, appointments, announcements, and presentations. Winterfest. Who's up on that?
Tracy.
Tracy.
Hello. I apologize if I start coughing. We're all kind of passing around the virus in our office. But Winterfest is this Friday, December 1st, from 6 to 8 here at Post Falls City Hall. We're doing a few changes this year. Every year we do some new and improvements. Last year we moved quite a bit of it outside. This year we're even adding more to the outside. We're moving our choirs out there. So I'm going to kind of give a quick rundown on the night just to get everyone excited and to come on down. So we'll start at about 6 o'clock, and Linda Wilhelm, our council president, will be doing the welcoming and helping us light the tree. And then Santa will be making an arrival. Well, first, I take that back. We're going to have a choir. They're going to bring Santa into town. And we'll have the elementary choir for that, and then he'll come. And then outside this year, we'll have burn barrels. We're having Mrs. Claus's Kitchen, which will have hot cider and everything to make s'mores. We have Scott's Kettle Corn, which is coming and going to be having kettle corn and hot coffee for sale. Then we're having the Purple Onion Catering is going to have hot soup available there. We'll have a few different crafts. Idaho Central Credit Union's coming, and they've made a large donation. They're also bringing their crew to do a craft with the kiddos. And Santa will be here. We're going to have a bell choir in our rotunda. So it'll be a jam-packed 2 hours here for a Winterfest, and hopefully the weather holds out. I keep watching it. At first it was just cloudy, and now it's like PM showers. I'm like, no, but we do have lots of tents. We'll have our burn barrels. It'll be warm, coffee, soup. Please just come out. It'll be wonderful. So that is about Winterfest. Anybody have any questions on it?
What time did it start?
Starts at 6 o'clock here. And Parks has done an amazing job, as you'll see. We knew they'd put too much work into it, that everything is lit except for our official tree. So the official tree will be lit that night.
Thank you. So now we're going to have a recognition.
I brought my notes up because I'm on that too.
This one's Tracy again.
Oh, Tracy got it first.
Hi, I'm back again. So I'm going to introduce, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but for our community, our Kevin Palmer, who is our post-fall cemetery sexton. I'm going to give you a little bit of a bio and introduce him, and then let him come up and tell you the really important, exciting stuff about it. Kevin grew up in Potlatch, Idaho, moved to Post Falls in 1995. He's a graduate of North Idaho College and has an Associate's of Arts and an Associate's of Science. He worked for the Post Falls School District for 5 years before we were lucky enough to get him. He started working in our cemetery in 2006 and became our cemetery sexton in 2011. To pass his time, he has 2 kiddos, a daughter and a son, and when time permits, he enjoys fly fishing. For the most part, in his own words, he told me his life is very boring. But Kevin does a lot of hard work for us and doesn't get as much credit as he probably should. He not only does he run the whole cemetery, he does a lot just intermixing with our department. He helps us on the recreation side at times. He pitches in with parks. He does all kinds of stuff. But for the past 4 years, Kevin has been diligently attending an educational program that would help in his career. It was sponsored by the International Cemetery Cremation and Funeral Association. It's designed to foster and promote professional performance in this field. So he went for 4 consecutive years. He went back to Memphis to take classes. So in 2014, his schooling focused directly on land management and grounds operation. In 2015, he focused on leadership, administration, and management. In 2016, he focused on sales and marketing. 2017, he studied the study of the funeral home management. Now I'm going to let Kevin come on up and explain in detail about the 4 different programs that he did and how it's being implemented in our daily operations. Sorry. Come on up, Kevin.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks, Commission, taking a little bit of time to hear about the training that we've done over the last couple of years for the cemetery. As she said, the ICCFA is an international organization. They do everything from Europe, Guam, Southeast, all over the United States. They meet in Memphis, Tennessee once a year as a university. Basically what they do is they bring in the highest standards for the profession to one spot, and they bring in the most qualified people to teach individual courses and sub-courses through that to give you the best experience that you can. As a cemeterian, funeral home directors, there's people there just from the Parks and Rec just to get the experience of what is there. The cemetery field is a narrow field, but it's very necessary. Most of the cities that you go to may not be municipally ran, but there is a cemetery and a sexton, groundskeepers throughout the country. In the university, about 300 people attend. So, like I said, it's not just groundspeople or funeral home directors, but they're from Germany, Chile, Canada, and they set the standard. The ICCFA sets the standard for the funeral home and the cemetery profession. They offer 7 classes a year. If you take 4 of them, you get an honorary certificate that you've completed or graduated the course. Basically what that means is you've taken 4 different classes in 4 different disciplines to get the best out there from all over the country and the world. 4 years, 40 hours a week, that's in-class training, so there's about 160 hours into that certificate at the end that goes into that. That doesn't include if you've taken any kind of classes, you know most of your information comes from outside the classroom when one person sits and talks to another. When I went there to begin with, I felt like I was the only person in the world that was having a problem at the cemetery. But when you get there and talk to anybody, just like it's worldwide. And it's nice to sit down and talk to different people from all over the country to find out what exactly is going on and that everybody has the same problems out there. Just how we get it done, how we get it fixed. The first year, like you said, Tracy said, we take land. I took grounds and lands management. That was the most predominant for me because I figured I was in that profession. That's what I needed to go to. We focused a lot on OSHA standards, safety, different parts of the country, Alabama where the graves fill up with water, and they have to pump them out before the services, something we don't have to do, but it's nice to know that there's different applications all over the country for different stuff. landscape design, different parts of the cemetery, how to draw people in, what features are needed, what features draw the most attention. We focused a little bit on that. We visited actually Graceland was one of our tours where we went to the Elvis graves and stuff like that. Most visited grave site in the country, obviously. I mean, they pretty much froze that place in time. It's very, very well done, very tasteful, very well presented. So it gives you an idea of what's going on there. Also, different operations and procedures, like I said, worldwide. I found out stuff that we did that nobody else has ever heard of at a little Post Falls, Idaho. I've actually sent off emails to people in Florida about how we dig our graves versus how they dig their stuff. The role of groundskeeper in the public eye. My guys that are out there on the grounds are the ones that are the face of the Post Falls Cemetery. I'm out there as well, but also my employees. If you see something that's going on out there, it's not going to be a reflection of the guy that's in the office. It's the guy that's on the grounds. So we make sure that everybody is involved. We did standard shirts. We wear black shirts now. All of my guys wear black shirts. I wear black shirts at City of Post Falls. That's how they designate us in the cemetery. We've also done a lot of training on the public interaction of my staff when they meet somebody out on the grounds, what my guys are supposed to do to help them locate lots, how to questions, answers, phone numbers to give out, that types of thing. And also, as far as the developmental on the ground side of it, the trend versus full burial versus cremation. Cremations are becoming way more trendy now, price-wise. The more people that come in, the more expensive funerals get, the more they're sliding towards the cremation side. So we're trying to develop the new section as we're developing up the expansion of the cemetery, long-term goals. We can't just go all full burials. We're going to have to go into some of the niches stuff. And that's where that class came into to apply to that, is they show you the trends of the things that are going on out there. So that was the lands and grounds management. That was my first class. The second one was the leadership and administration. Leadership and administration, part of it was working with your employees, how to get things done, communication with your employees, getting both sides of the story, also working with the families, scheduling funerals, appointments for families, how to deal with the families that are coming in. Unfortunately, I meet a lot of great people at probably the worst time that you can ever meet them. It gets very difficult at sometimes. We've done 4 services in the last 2 weeks of children under 2 weeks. So it gets pretty stressful through the families and through the employees sometimes as well. So we learn how to do some of that stuff. We're also looking at right now doing a new record keeping system that's going to get applied to the cemetery as soon as we find the software that's going to be agreeable price-wise and user-friendly for the cemetery up there. So we are looking at upgrading our record keeping system. We trying to get away from the old paper books. I got a book that looks like it's been put through the weather, I mean, for years and years and years. So we're trying to update, keep up with it. We've also updated our rules and regulations this year, trying to get with the change. Some of the state laws have changed. Some of the cemetery best practices have changed. Where I learned about that last year. All these classes kind of intertwined, so I learned about last year. We updated our rules and regulations. Also, we've started doing triplicate receipts where the customer gets a copy, I get a copy that keeps at the cemetery, and also it goes into the main files at City Hall. So we've kind of upped it a little bit, trying to get that administration side down of it. So there's some cross checks now. There's some safety nets that are in there. The third year, I took sales and marketing. It was designed, it went more to meet the needs of the family, what they're looking for, whether it's like I've implemented more the needs of the family. If you're coming in to buy a single lot at that time, now I'm talking to the families about what about your kids, what about your wives, what about extended family? Are we looking at doing a family plot? So we've kind of upped our sales that way. And also we want to do in sales and marketing is how we set ourselves apart. Why are people coming to the Post Falls Cemetery? Some of it's because of longevity. They grew up here. They want to be buried here. That's great. The other part about it is we had a citizen in the community donate a fountain up there. That's a big draw to it. Sales and marketing side of it. We've updated our Facebook pages. We also announced in the Post Falls Parks and Recreation Guide, we try and put out before Memorial Day, we put a half sheet in there about Memorial Day, what time it starts, what we're about, that type stuff. So we're trying to get more sales, but sales that meet the family's needs, not just to make money. So we want that who we are out there. We want that Post Falls Cemetery, City Cemetery. It's a community thing. It's not a moneymaker. It's not a this. It's not a that. They want to come there because that's a service that we provide at our highest standards. Funeral home management was the last class that I took. Had a little apprehension taking it because it states funeral home management, and obviously we're not in the funeral home business. The good thing about it is I talked to enough people in my third year there that they said, this is the one that you need to take, because it wasn't on funeral home management, it was on the management of yourself. It was use the funeral home as a base, but it was what you were, what you stood for, what do you want to be perceived as, how do you want the public to look at you and your business, not just a funeral home management. So we did, we implemented some stuff, we did the expansion due to increased population. Of course, we got, unfortunately, more people moving in, more people that are passing away. We also did some of the stuff on the management, the traditional side of it versus the changing practices side, which is what I was talking about before, cremation versus full burial. Obviously, I'm not going to ask some members of the religious community if they want to be cremated because that's against their religious beliefs, so I have to keep up to date on that. And that's always changing. The Catholic Church just kind of approved cremation here about in the last 6-7 years. So it's training the designs and the limit to our products and what we can do for the people that are out there for the management is for yourself. It's letting people know you want to let them know what they are. We also took a short tour of a monument company that designs our headstones and our monuments. So now we're also available not only to sell them, we're also able to design them and help them know what they want as far as what we can do. I hate to tell somebody, yeah, we're going to be able to do this, and then come to find out that we can't. So that management style has to be internal and external as well, and kind of keep up on what's going on out there. But it was 4 years of a lot of information, a lot of people. I met a lot of people from across the United States, and it's nice, like I said, nice to know that there's other people out there having the same problems that I am. It's nice to know those people have fixed their problems and how they did it, and to bring it back to a community here. And I'd just like to thank the city for sending me back there, and also to let everybody know that continuing education is a big part of all our jobs, and to keep up not what's happening in our little city, but countrywide. So thanks for listening to me. Sorry I ramble. I'm not much of a public speaker, but it could have been anywhere between 5 minutes and 15 minutes, but we got her somewhere in between. So thanks again for listening. Appreciate it.
Kevin, I was going to say, I went to the fountain dedication, and afterwards, the person who
If
donated.
you're into adventure, you will love the newest attraction at Northwest
break.
Trek.
We have a
It's
commercial break
extreme,
somewhere.
it's fun, and it's already getting a lot of buzz.
What did I do, bump it?
I think so.
Nice.
Anyway, he expressed, huge gratitude to you and to Brian and to Dave in that project, and just could not express enough, his appreciation. Beautiful. It looks beautiful. I've been involved with some cemetery projects over the past several years, and just since you've kind of stepped in there, it's been amazing. So thank you.
Well, thank you. No, and it's great to see that community come together around, a cemetery especially, but what that gentleman has donated to us is beyond words. I thank him every time I see him. So
It's beautiful. If you guys haven't had a chance to see it, the fountain in the cemetery is beautiful.
it's covered right now. It won't be open again probably until 1st of March when the weather cleans up again, but it's covered and winterized right now.
Seems like that was a real good program for you to attend and listen to the agenda, kind of the curriculum that you had. One question, you were talking about the number of plots, or I'm curious about the number of plots. What's our capacity when remaining capacity?
Remaining capacity on the developed section right now, we're actually down to about 200 lots that are scattered left and right. It sounds like a bunch, but I'm selling anywhere between about 94 and 100 a year. but we're right in the middle of a current development now that should, once that's developed to its max, should take us out for about the next 35 to 40 years. So once we can get that new development started and the landscaping started and plotted out and stuff like that, then we'll be in pretty good shape. But right now, like I said, we're down to about 200 lots and about 125 niches, which are the above-ground ash repositories that sit above the ground. So,
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you
all
so
right.
much for your
Thanks,
time.
guys.
That leaves us about 2 years.
Okay, moving on to old business, we're going to have a pickleball update, Brian.
Yes. So, the last meeting we had, I guess, 2 meetings ago, back in July, we had a discussion about pickleball and some of the desires from the community to expand the offerings of pickleball in the community. And we made a decision, or the commission made a decision to modify facilities out at Beck to expand and provide 3 courts all at one location out there, and that we were able to make that happen. Sportsman Park still has the 2 courts, and then Meadows we're converting to a basketball facility, kind of a partial court facility out there. All of the improvements were done at the park at Beck, and so that pickleball court assembly is now 3 courts, and they are being used out there. We've had a little bit of feedback as it relates to kind of how tight those courts are, because they are at the minimum standards for a pickleball setup, because that's all the room we had to be able to accommodate 3 courts at that location. So we're a little limited between courts on the amount of space that's there. It doesn't necessarily reduce the safety, but those that are playing a little more competitive pickleball, they're seeing that they're having a couple conflicts with the adjoining court. So a little bit of a learning curve there, but once again, it did provide that enhanced or consolidated location. Kind of on the heels of that change, the president, there's a change in the North Idaho Pickleball Association, and the president there sat down with Dave and presented some information and the association's desire to consolidate and provide a regional pickleball type facility. And once again, we did recently update our levels of service as it relates to all park amenities within the system per 1,000 people. Pickleball was increased in the number of courts that we provide per 1,000 in that last round of updating those levels of service standards. But this is just kind of for information. There's a little note that was provided by the president of the association, Mike Sears, in your packet for you to review and give feedback to staff. And then really the decision point is when we do update the standards at the next time, kind of on a every 2-year basis. So any questions on that?
So are we just kind of having a holding pattern right now until?
Right. Yeah, at this point, we're more or less on a holding pattern. We do have 2 courts planned for the park at Tullamore, so that'll increase our level of service yet again and most likely bump us above our population standard, or number of courts per population. So that'll be one of those that we will almost have a surplus per population, and then eventually population will catch that, and we'll have to look for our next location for those sorts of courts.
So was kind of the request basically along the lines they want to have something where they can hold a tournament and have more players at the same location? Was
Right.
the gist of it.
Yeah. And the court that they provided as an example is one that the national tournaments held at down in the Southwest. So it generally looks like it's an old tennis facility that's been converted, and that facility offers well over 20 courts at one location, so they can hold this large tournament. Whether or not Post Falls would be that same type of destination is.
The courts.
How many courts are needed for a tournament?
It would depend on the size of tournament, and that would be a good question for Tracy, because I know you run an indoor practice league, and
We do. I mean, we normally would need probably at least 10 to 12 courts to run a decent-sized tournament.
Could that be at the same location?
That's what they would love. I mean, that makes it for a more exciting tournament. But as we, right now, with like basketball, we're scattered amongst the community in different gyms and stuff. But they would love a central location.
And if we were to move on a tournament like that, there are some opportunities for us to use other hard surface courts. In particular, you look at the area around Sportsman's Park where we have 2 dedicated courts. We could go up to White Pine and we could get 3 courts on each of those basketball courts. So we could get another 6 there, and then we could get another potentially 9 courts on the tennis facilities on the north side of Pole Line. So we could host a tournament right there in that corridor, really closely located, without a lot of work. We'd have to purchase some temporary nets to be able to accommodate that sort of facility. And then it wouldn't necessarily be a location that would be dedicated for that sort of use all the time. And so we wouldn't have a lot of downtime on courts that are being unused. So there are opportunities within our existing infrastructure to be able to make some of these changes and accommodate a tournament if we had that sort of interest. But it doesn't necessarily serve their need for league play. You know, if the North Idaho Pickleball Association's running leagues and that sort of thing. We don't know of any of those that are going on at the moment, but if that's the case and that's why they're looking to consolidate courts, we may not serve that use real well at the moment. So we just kind of have to work on those dynamics as they are presented.
Would that be a revenue source?
League play or a tournament? Both of those could be a revenue source. Yeah. And I don't know what sort of interest we'd have in any of that. That'd be.
I mean, people love a tournament, a big tournament. So we haven't entered the pickleball tournament. We haven't offered our league play. Did go well. We did try to offer an open gym pickleball just so people could come in and at least play and stuff. And that didn't have as much success as we had thought. So currently we've just done beginning pickleball lessons, and we've also done a small league play. It hasn't taken off like we had thought it would. Just when we were on the cuffs of really getting there and starting to blast up, the teacher actually that we had at the time moved out of the area. We do now have some new leads on it. A lot of it has to do with their kind of, I mean, it's like any sport, like in volleyball, they kind of have their group that they're amongst and hang out. And once the word starts getting out in that group, we see the greater change or greater growth in it. So we need to tap into that again.
Does Spokane have anything like that? Like league play?
They have some league plays and games and stuff. They don't have a large facility like they're wanting there either, but they do have play and stuff. Yes.
What I'm sure this national championships is probably the largest. I'm assuming.
That's what yes.
Yeah. Do you have any idea what the turnout for that was? Just curious.
I don't know. I actually didn't sit down in on the meeting. Dave did. I've only read kind of through his notes and stuff, so I don't know the answer to that.
But in the email or the information that was provided, it said the 2016 event had a little under 900 registered paid players. And that resulted in just over 2,000 individual matches. So.
Interesting.
And the facility isn't only accommodating that use. When you look at the photos of that event, it's kind of reminiscent of our Post Falls Festival event. So there's some large grounds to be able to sort and have food vendors and suppliers of products and that sort of thing. So there's a lot more going on than just those 900 registrants. They're definitely capitalizing on all of the other interest and promoting their products and all of those sorts of things, and being able to get vendor booths in to make the tournament work. So when you're looking at a facility that's going to accommodate that many courts, you're going to have to look at those ancillary services as well if we're going to try to move in that direction to actually make it work. And those are things that we're considering as we look at the sports field complex. You know, we're looking at something that'll host tournaments and be able to host and serve the community outside of the individual players, because the players consist of, 9 people on a baseball team. In pickleball, you've got 2 people out on a court on a team, or 4 people on a court if you're playing doubles. But you've got other people that are there watching and that are traveling to the event. And so can you capture those people and help that experience to also be something that's well served and can serve the community as well.
Just never happens fast enough, does it?
Never does.
Probably never will.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I grew up playing tennis, courts, and we operated just like what Brian said. The early rounds, they had us everywhere, and then as the tournament shrunk, as the winners were progressing, then they consolidated back into a central area. And to this day, they've never had a giant, but tennis courts are a lot larger, so I was trying to just kind of.
I grew up a tennis player too, same way.
Yeah, it worked out fine.
Baseball wasn't much different in my young years. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, any other questions or discussion?
I think so.
Good job.
Okay. Well, I don't see any citizens in the audience. Do we have any written citizen issues? Okay, moving along. New business. Deep Forest Challenge.
You want me to start
So
it?
Tracy's going to get us started here, and then we'll kind of tag team this as we go.
Okay, so in your packet, you saw the proposal for the Challenge Adventure course that's in there. I'm going to just sometimes what you see in words and to see it in real life is a little bit different and more exciting. So Brian had pulled up a video. I'm going to go ahead and show you. I have to do something to get it.
You ready?
Yep.
If you're into adventure, you will love the newest attraction at Northwest Trek. It's extreme, it's fun, and it's already getting a lot of buzz. Get ready for the adventure of a lifetime.
It is a challenge course. It's not your average leisurely zip line.
Challenging both mentally
It makes you push yourself beyond what you thought you could do.
and physically.
So you really have to be on your game, and it really does test your will and your gumption to get up there and do it.
It's called Deep Forest Challenge, and climbing this 30-foot high rock wall is just the beginning.
All right, let's rock and roll.
As you zip through your first 320 feet of thick, lush greenery, it's pure adrenaline. And from here on out, there's no turning back.
Ultimately, when you are up on the course, you're alone. You don't have somebody babysitting you. All you have is somebody on the ground making sure that you're doing everything properly.
The challenges, like climbing through this 50-foot high, horizontally suspended cargo net, get progressively harder.
Yeah, definitely is a tiring one.
After each triumph,
Up and over. Woo!
an exhilarating ride through the forest. And then onto the next extreme challenge, like walking over this aerial bridge 55 feet above ground.
It's best to step with a bounce.
The whole course takes 20 to 30 minutes, depending on your skill level, in addition to the safety and training exercise before you go up. And by the time you get to the tightrope near the end of the course,
Hold on tight.
you're ready for your next ride.
Let's go.
With 6 thrilling zip lines and 8 extreme challenges, you'll use muscles you never knew you had.
You'll definitely feel the burn.
The burn and the satisfaction of a mission complete.
Awesome every time.
Deep Forest Challenge opens in July. The cost is $39.95 in addition to your admission to Northwest Trek.
So we've got a couple other ones that we can show you some of the pictures. I actually ended up doing one of the ones that's in here. It was in Whitefish. We decided to stop on our way back from Glacier and something we were going to do before we headed home. And it was a fun, exhilarating, and exhausting day. And I did find out I had fears that I never knew I had. But in the same time, I had a great time. And I also found out, like she talked about, that you use muscles that you never knew you're going to. So there's a few different ones in our area. The pictures he's shown, this is the one that's in Whitefish that I ended up doing. And then there's ones that are here outside of Coeur d'Alene. Is this the one that, this is at Luther Haven, right? The Luther Haven course is in the area. There's also the Micah Moon Zip course.
Yeah.
We have that one. And then there's the regular zip lining up at Wallace. And then there's a new one in Liberty Lake, you said, right?
That's Micah Moon.
Okay, the Micah Moon is in Liberty Lake. So there's a few different courses in our area. These, the proposal that we have, actually, as you delve into it, they want to have like 60 different obstacles amongst the course. Me on the recreation side, I'm like, oh my gosh, this looks fun. It would be a wonderful destination stop for our community. I mean, we could work together with them, our camp. I love it. I know there's some obstacles we need to cross over for it to happen, and Brian's got a lot on the park side, because they really, the proposal talks about wanting to bring it to Corbin Park. And as we all know, Corbin Park's a pretty busy park right now, and we have a lot of stuff going on there, and then also with our disc golf, and there would be some rearranging of our park in general. Do you want to show that?
Yeah. So, a couple of different items that were kind of stand out as we began to look at this. Is just looking at the different options for these adventure type courses, and what we're typically seeing in our region right now are those zipline type tours, and that's what we have out at Whitefish. Whitefish has a few of the adventure type elements. The Timberline system over that you can register at the resort plaza shops. These two photos are from that. You have these canopy type bridges, and then more of this zip line style as well. Kind of reaching back into some of my contacts from previous employment at some of the local resorts. They're looking more towards this as an option as well. One of their kind of holdups in the past to not moving in this direction was that they were their resort was for sale, and they were looking at the long-term lease as something as kind of a hang up for them. So that's one of the points of consideration as we open up this discussion a little bit further. Also, methods of construction. You know, these are generally utilizing existing green infrastructure and trees. The proposal does say that it's non-invasive construction techniques. We'd like to look into that a little bit further from a management standpoint, just to identify exactly what that looks like and how it's managed, and how that's going to impact the tree canopy within Corbin, if that's where it ends up going, or elsewhere. And if there are other options that work within their constraints, and whether or not they might be something that we could research with them or not. And then this version here that I'm showing up in the upper right is the park just outside of Yellowstone, and it uses poles that are installed in the ground. That way it isn't utilizing existing green infrastructure, and so a little bit of a different construction method. This can also be used in conjunction with existing green infrastructure, so you're not necessarily dependent fully on having mature canopy and being able to integrate the two of those things so that you can have a complete system. On the park-specific side, as we begin to look at Corbin Park, our existing uses there, we have picnic activity, day use type activities, the softball field / Little League field that get a fair amount of use at that site. River access, very, very popular spot in the summer months to access the Spokane River and float downstream. And also the disc golf course out there, and the work that we've done over the last 2 years of working with that community to retain an 18-hole course at this site and be able to make that something that's viable for a little longer term. And then also we have the plans for, or a master plan that's been developed for the site that includes overnight camping and tent stalls and hostel type, or not hostel, but camper cabin style development. So those are the considerations, our existing plans for the facility, as well as the existing constraints. This proposed plan did retain the disc golf course, and as we've seen with the existing uses out there and the conflicts we've had with the green infrastructure, this slope up here took the brunt of the first 10 or 15 years of traffic, and erosion became an issue out here on this side. And we've ultimately tried to reduce the amount of traffic that we have on this side of the course for disc golf. So largely, our new course moved down here towards the flats, and then we threw from high points down to low points, trying to keep the bulk of the disc golf traffic down low. That being said, the bulk of our course is now situated where the campground will go. Basically, everything to the west of this line that makes up the fairway for 8 would become part of that campground in the second plan here. So hole 8 sits here. It kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at. The remaining portions of the course ended up located at this location. So as we look at the proposal for Deep Forest, here's the baseball field at this location. This is a Google map, so the roads aren't necessarily illustrated right where they are in the world, but the bulk of this course is located on the west side or east side of the park, between the turnaround out by the whitewater access and the baseball field.
Will that get any flooding?
It's pretty limited potential for flooding where they have this laid out. There's some potential for it, but this last spring was a pretty good indicator of if it was going to flood, it likely would have this past spring, and this area did not have any significant flooding that I would anticipate would impact this sort of facility. So I wouldn't see that as a major concern. I've heard of one time in the last 40 years where water crossed this section of roadway and washed over into the park. So that it's pretty limited, more or less a 100-year event that we'd have flooding into this section of the park. Whereas this section of the park, that's a fairly regular occurrence. You know, that's pretty much every spring we're going to see water into that area. Not necessarily to the extent that we saw this past spring, but it is a concern, or it's a reality of the site. The other element that, from a staff's perspective, we have concern at this site is we have a lot of use at Corbin Park as it is. Our best estimates are showing somewhere between 80 and 90,000 visits a year at this site. And when you build out the plan from Deep Forest, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 15,000 to 20,000 vehicles is what we'd be expecting to have to park in addition to what our existing use is at this site, all things remaining the same. That being coupled with Post Falls is a growing community. We have a limited number of water access sites below the dam, Corbin being the largest of those. So those realities have to be considered as well. And then lastly, forest management concerns. All of those uses, along with the drought that we've experienced the last couple of summers, Corbin Park is pretty stressed at the moment. We had a pretty big instance of Ips beetle and mountain pine beetle at this site, and over this coming winter, we're going to be having to remove a little over 60 pines from the site. mostly on the west side of the park. There are some isolated pockets on the east side of the park in some of the rockier areas. It's definitely a pine site that does see this sort of turnover, but the existing uses out there, we have very little regeneration of younger forest underneath that existing stand. So as we see that existing stand beginning to fade out because of this insect infestation, we've got very little potential for that to regrow underneath it as it is. So we've got a little bit of a management issue to work through as it is right now. And we're being active in that management role. Some of that may have to do with the windstorm and the snowstorm that we experienced 3 years ago. Those realities sometimes are felt 3-4 years down the road. And then we had some pretty big droughty summers the last 2 years. So that's kind of a snapshot of where we're at Corbin Park right now. And we'd like to open up kind of the conversation and a dialogue of where do we want to go with this sort of proposal? Is this sort of public-private partnership something that the commission sees worthy of staff pursuing further? Is this site something that the commission would like to see us look at, or do you have other suggestions for a similar type activity elsewhere within the park system? And then we'll kind of open the conversation from there and see where it goes.
Can you explain what that partnership would look like?
So the proposal has a profit sharing element to the contract, or it's not really a contract at this point, it's more of a business plan of how they're planning on running this sort of operation within our park set. And generally it's tiered so that the first, second, and third year it works its way up to what they're proposing at an 8% revenue share would come back to the parks. The first year being 5%, second year being 6%. So 5, 6, and then 8 starting in the third year. They would like to have a 20-year lease for the facility. That way they can recoup their infrastructure cost. Somewhere in the neighborhood of $700,000 is what they're planning on installing in terms of capital outlay to be able to get this off the ground. So they want to have a long enough lease that they can see that recoup, as well as be able to maintain their facilities throughout that lease period.
So would that lease be based on that percentage of profit sharing, or is it in addition to that profit sharing?
The lease, there was no mention of a lease outright,
Okay.
So it would just be compensated based on the revenue share. That's the way I read it. Yeah.
And what kind of population are they looking at doing this 7 days a week? Are they looking 7 days a week?
Yep.
I'm sure they have a projected clientele.
They did. Yes. Yeah, they did within the proposal. What page do you have there, Tracy?
I have the
12.
That's the profit sharing.
Oh, okay.
They do. They have it completely broken out, actually.
What page is that on?
The profit share was on 12.
Yeah.
So you could work back
I get
based
to
on
page 12.
the fee structure that they have outlined for the area.
Get to 12.
Oh, visitors. Here we go. Visitors, first year, 8,000. By year 10, they're looking at plateauing out around 17,000 visitors. And
17,000.
the city's share of that revenue in year 10 would be somewhere around 55,000.
And, well, first of all, it sounds fun, but I'm also looking at all the challenges too, especially with that park. So all the wear and tear on the park that's going to add to that, is that our responsibility?
All that would have to be outlined, and that's something that's definitely worthy of this dialogue is what are your concerns? What would you like to make sure staff looks at if we are going to go out for a proposal on this sort of activity? And that's something else I probably should step back and mention. If we are going to move forward with this sort of an amenity and a public-private partnership, we'd have to open up to public bid. and do a request for proposals for a specific range of types of activities or certain number of elements. We'd have to come up with a scope of what we're looking for and then allow outside companies to come in and compete for that business.
Okay, so I guess offhand, my thought is, in looking at the share portion of it, it doesn't seem like a lot. So when you have to weigh that against staff time, erosion issues, you know, what we're going to have to do to continue to maintain that property. So I'd like to, I think that we should be looking at creative ways to, if we were interested in moving forward, on how we're not just relying on that 5 to 8% or 8%. It just seems like a small amount, actually. But, and I may be wrong, but we're only going to have to be able to anticipate how many staff hours it's going to take, how much is that portion going to cost us, and if it's a wash, then we would have to kind of be creative in what that would look like beyond, especially if they're looking for a 20-year lease and we're just looking at numbers through the first 10.
Right.
We had a little bit of a concern between the short and the tall, but we had a little bit of concern with what our share would be too. We were talking amongst ourselves, and I know there's separate things, but all of our contracts that we do with our commercial businesses here is martial arts or golf or something. The least we've ever done a contract for was a 20% take on it. So that was a little bit shocking on that number. Normally, our normal contract would run like a 70-30. So again, we're kind of on the same page on how much work's going to go into it for what would be a return.
It's, and I mean, yes, you can say all the tourism marketing things about becoming a destination place, but if that small percentage is eaten up in our time and then some, then I'm not quite sure what that value brings. But then on the other hand, I mean, I've been on Park and Rec for a long time, and we've always had this huge dream of putting some type of suspension bridge across to the Crutch property, and something like this would lend itself to that particular possibility, but I don't even know what that looks like too. So financially, it just really has to make sense, because in the end, if it's a wash or we're losing, that's taxpayers' money, and that's a burden that I'm not quite sure it should be put on the taxpayers just to have a cool event place.
Yeah. What do you see as the advantage to us entering into this? I mean, bringing in a private party.
I think the two main things that stand out to me is something that can be unique and brand our area. You know, Coeur d'Alene has a very similar dynamic with the carousel downtown, and that's operating in sort of this public-private partnership. I know it's a nonprofit that helped bring that facility in, and then the park is operating it, and they've got an organization that's making that all happen. So it's something to help brand Post Falls, and if we're looking to bring in that adventure, try to kind of pivot off of our existing rock climbing opportunities and the open space opportunities that are along the river, this may help identify that brand and help to communicate that outside of the region. And it also puts somebody else's marketing dollars out there publishing that for us. So it wouldn't necessarily just be us as a city or us as a other community agencies like the Chamber trying to market Post Falls as this outdoor destination for attracting residents and that sort of thing, because that is one of the functions that our park system does assist with. So I think those are the two big elements that I see. And then the other part of it, is it something that can increase awareness of our natural and open spaces, and maybe even be a little bit of an educational component, both on the recreation side and in the forest stewardship side? Is it something that we can pull in a broader base of individuals and get them out into that open area and begin to expose them to what Post Falls does offer along our river and in our open spaces, and maybe they begin to use some of the other park amenities that are along the river, and become a little more awareness of exactly what Post Falls Park does offer.
It's a little tricky because Corbin's just right there at near the state line, and you don't always hear of people venturing on in, further. So then those marketing dollars would come out of our pocket to try to educate them to the other things. I'm wondering if it was considered what a different park could bring. I mean, is it too premature to talk about the land that we've acquired off of Camillin Park? I mean, is there areas in there that it might make more sense? Because then it accomplishes everything that you just said.
Okay.
Open spaces, people are aware that we're there. We've got these amazing rock climbing walls that are, family orientated. We've talked as a commission the past several years about, I think 3 to 4, about do we put in smaller rock climbing walls in the Camillin Park so that kids and families can start, using that, getting used to it, so they can venture out into the rest of the park to use those rock climbing walls. I mean, all those behaviors seem to be really similar to these outdoor adventures for outdoor enthusiasts. I'm just not quite sure that Corbin's the right place. I mean, Corbin Park's amazing, and especially when you talk to someone who's lived here a long time, but is it going to accomplish the goals that we need to, and then what is the tax burden going to be? And that.
Those are 2 big things you'd like to have solved as we continue a dialogue with this company or others.
Exactly, and but I'd like to know what your feeling is. I mean, to move, or anyone's, an opportunity to move it from Corbin to Camillin.
I think that's one of the first things we said is we looked at the thing and we were excited by it because we knew from doing our comprehensive plan and stuff that outdoor recreation and adventure was one of our top fields that we needed to hit. And I think the first thing that Brian and I said as we looked at it is, it's a really cool thing. What about a different park? That's kind of the first. I mean, and he knows a lot more on the direct impact from the parks manager. I just know from how heavily used Corbin is and some of the things we hear administratively, some of the issues that are going on at Corbin. And so, yes, he and I kind of went through a couple parks right at the top of my head. I said, that's something that probably wouldn't be allowed at Kiwanis. We said no. We talked about Black Bay. He had some suggestions from the park side on it. So, yeah, I mean, another park is definitely a thought that I think needs to be well thought out as an idea.
And I guess we would want to hear, especially Ryan, from your side of it too, when you dig into this deeper. I don't know if it means coming back and letting us know, okay, here's the impact that would have here. Maybe it is a better fit in Corbin, and here's the reasons why. I mean, I don't know that any of us would object to an opportunity to have another, place that outdoor enthusiasts come to Post Falls. I mean,
Right.
I work with the tourism grant, so I know how important that is. So it's almost like you need to talk us into why it would work that way. That's my feeling on it. I saw you shaking your head yes to that.
Yeah.
Piece of it too. I just, and then should that discussion happen, it's like, hey, we could do this here and this and this and this, then that would, I think, be really great for us to go into a workshop and really talk about what that would look like and what, get our hands a little bit, working on a plan so that we can kind of see what that would look like. Look at, do we have a lease agreement that is another revenue generator for that? Do we renegotiate a percentage? Open it up to bid to other people. They may be coming in with something that's a little more pleasing to the city. So it's an exciting conversation, but it just seems premature in a way.
Yeah, and I think they say they're on tight time constraints, right? They want to be done by, I was reading, February or.
I think Dave answered that back.
Yeah.
I know he said 6 months. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, the revenue share bothers me. The side of the park. So I know 7 days a week. How long are they talking about being open? Because I can't assume that they would do this in our winter months. So like 200 days out of the year, are they?
Somewhere in that neighborhood. Yeah, 30 weeks, somewhere in that. It was largely summer months is their target market.
And then, I mean, would that part of the park be basically cordoned off while
Yes.
activities are going on?
They actually talked about fencing it and having like their cabin for the, where people will come up to pay and that kind of stuff. So yes.
Okay, so
definitely
they're
impacted.
pretty much going to be exclusive to just that.
And how close is that going to be to the ball field? It seems like it's almost like right on it.
That's probably the one use I don't see a lot of conflict with.
Okay,
Yeah, that's probably the least impacted existing use at Corbin
okay.
with this amenity coming in. As it's laid out in their plan, there's a number of day use sites that are along some parking facilities. Go back to so this is our existing course map. We've got parking facilities here. This is generally where they would base their operations out of, and they'd have a little cabin to be able to secure their harnesses and other supplies needed to run their operation. So that would all be located here, and then they had courses that went out this direction, out through here, and then crossed back over to this side. So all of these parking spaces along here, I'd have concern about elements getting dropped down onto a car and some of those security and safety issues that would have to be addressed either by the project proponent or by relocating that parking facility elsewhere. There's also a lot of day use picnic tables and fire pits that are along that side of the park. So those considerations are largely unmet in the proposal.
And a couple more things from that map too is, you have to drive through, a residential area to get down in there. What's the impact going to be on that? Would they be willing to pave that road? There's just, some of those pieces too. And once they're spread out all over, what happens to, people who've been kayaking there for years and are we going to be able to reaccommodate them in a way that they're not conflicting?
I think we'd be hard pressed to squeeze another use into this site. We'd have to transplant some of the existing uses and provide some other elements somewhere else. Definitely the disc golf element, I just don't see that being possible with this coming into play. If we decide to move forward with the deep forest proposal or something similar at Corbin, disc golf has got to find a new home. Baseball could likely fit, at least until the point where we move on a campground facility. The camping facilities, I think, could fit with this pretty easily. But once again, now we're limiting parking even further because some of our existing parking facilities that are in and around the baseball facility end up becoming campsites already. So there's a number of things moving as this proposal begins to work. And I think 6 months might be a little bit of a short time frame for us to be able to answer all of those questions with the vendor and get to a contract. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of Corbin Park for this. I think there's other locations that are worthy of exploring. We'd love to get some more feedback on, where your commission is on, yes, pursue something like this, or here's some other elements that we're seeing out and about that I think would be worthy as well.
Well, I'd like to ask my fellow commissioners if this particular type of operation made sense for the revenue, for what our responsibility is for the wear and tear. Do you feel like it's something that would enhance our outdoor activities here in Post Falls? And then if not, then that's kind of an answer. And if so, then do we move it, then have a discussion about where else it could play in our city?
I think it's an awesome idea. Corbin Park, I don't know if that's a great idea, but I like the attraction to our parks. I've done a lot of ropes courses. I think they're really fun. And with things like Tough Mudder and things like that, outdoor activities is super popular. So I like the revenue idea. I don't like the proposed revenue idea, but yeah, so different location, and I would definitely say some negotiation with the revenue. I'm interested to pursue at least that, to see what they would offer.
How many of these type facilities are within our area?
Just those
This-
4?
Yeah, there's the 5, I think, that we had up on the board, and that's going out to Whitefish, Montana, so Kalispell region. So it's something that people will travel for, and that's why you're seeing a lot of the wintertime resorts looking at these sorts of facilities, because they already have that marketing niche, and they're seeing this as a kind of an auxiliary revenue source during their down season, and they're having to respond to the environment. We may have a little bit of an advantage by being real close to a population center as compared to a lot of these resorts that people are having to travel a long ways for. Sure. A couple advantages, I guess, to something like this for our community.
What would the cost be to do this? I mean,
They have in their proposal, I think it was almost $60 a person, wasn't it? Are you talking about like per person fee?
that was, well, to put this whole thing together, how much money?
Didn't they say
would the
5 to
city have to pay?
700,000?
5 to
700,000 in the proposal.
That was going to be their capital
Contribution.
investment into the facility.
Their investment or the city's investment?
Their investment. Yeah, they would be the owners of that infrastructure for the lease term. And then we'd have to determine, a lot of times on something like this, things that are fixed to the ground become the city's. Whether or not we'd want that to be the case in something like this, from a risk management perspective, would be something we'd definitely go and have discussions with our insurance and our attorney to determine if we'd want it to all be removed, if they just did decide to remove their contract or something happened that way. We'd have to have something in the contract to ensure that the city was protected in those ways. So there's a lot of details that would still have to be worked through.
And it's a very different type of partnership than somebody who's teaching karate. It's not apples to apples. So to me, it seems like we would have to come up with a whole new policy of what that type of partnership would look like when we're talking that type of investment, both in staff and money.
And for the partner.
Yeah, for the partner too, absolutely, yes.
I'm kind of with you, Tammy, that I'm not a big fan of the location and moving the disc golf. You know, if we've taken this out there, that's a great setup. And they're funneling all those people through there. I haven't done the ropes and that sort of thing, so I don't know, I'm kind of scared of heights, so I don't know if that's going to work for me.
Me too.
But I can give it a try. And I can, the 20-year lease is concerning, because what if it doesn't work out how we think it will? Then you have a 20-year lease, but then with the capital investment they're putting into it, I can see why they want a 20-year lease.
Right.
And the advantage is that they man it and provide all the capital up front and provide the activity. It's long-term.
So who would maintain this infrastructure that they would put in there? Would they do that?
They would. Yeah, it would be their operation just within our park. So basically, we're renting the dirt underneath their facilities.
And you would be the sheriff of that, wouldn't you?
We'd have to have some level of oversight or
Right.
something within the contract that allows the checks and balances. The other concern I have with Corbin is site security after hours and how that would look with some of the activities that we already have with conflict down there. It's the nicest way I can say it.
The level of maintenance that they would have to provide, would that be something that we would decide on, or is that something they would do? Or
yeah, there's some pretty stringent industry standards for this sort of activity, and this company's very reputable in that arena, and they're proven. And both of those elements would be something that we'd want to include in an RFP, that the company shows a track record of successfully operating this sort of facility. That way we have some assurity that, yeah, this company is going to be around for more than 10 years and likely can execute the lease. We'd also want to make sure that we have something in there that references those industry standards, and that they're training X number of staff, and that they're managing the facility and inspecting a facility on these sorts of circumstances. But ultimately, those elements would get transferred to that organization, because they'd be operating a business within the public park. Not that the city couldn't be named if something went bad. That's a whole nother.
So the maintenance would be up to the city's standards.
It would be up.
That says,
There would be a couple standards that we'd be looking at, not only ours, but the industry standard too, for that.
I think the elements that would be more up to city standards would be placing the site for trash and litter, and ensuring that the facilities are safe for park users that are exterior of their event, so that those elements those are the areas that I think we'd have more interaction with than necessarily the elements that are elevated.
suppose this whole thing doesn't take off and it's not making them money, then they want to shut this thing down. Does that mean then they just remove everything? Or, I mean...
That would be in our contract with them.
That would be something we'd have to definitely consider in the contract.
Like reclaiming the land, or if we want to...
Right. And having that mentioned here helps us, if we're going to pursue something like this, to begin to draft that RFP. So this is all really good dialogue for our staff to begin to pull this information together to be able to make a...
So, commissioners, and I think it's an exciting project, and it could be a lot of fun. So, I mean, my input is we should explore it and look at it, because I know that was your question. Is that what we want to do? But I don't. What do you feel? Do you feel like we can explore it? It doesn't necessarily mean that we're putting our stamp of approval on.
I think we can explore it. Yes, it's worth that. But I think we need to think about all these things we've mentioned. Mm-hmm. This is something that could happen.
What do you think? To explore it?
Yeah, I agree.
To explore it? So that answers your first question. Yeah, I think that we're in agreement to explore it. More and more questions start coming up, like, okay, so when that particular course is not trendy anymore and they want to change it, how's that going to impact, how are we going to figure out what that area looks like? But I think we're all in agreement that Corbin's not a good fit. Am I speaking for everyone on that?
I think so. I mean, I would go along with the rest of you on that. I'm not all that familiar with all the parks because I'm kind of new.
Sure. But Corbin is just, it feels like we finally got the disc golf to a place that there's peace and it's working really well, and with opportunity to grow for the campgrounds. And it's so far removed from where we're going to be creating this city center. So it just, what's going to benefit us as a destination place, as a tourism piece for outdoor enthusiasts that's going to maybe potentially, generate some revenue is not in Corbin Park.
Okay.
That's I think what we're...
So what I'm hearing is that finding a location that does benefit some of our other developments within our downtown corridors and some of our more busy locations, so that some of our local businesses can benefit from this sort of activity.
Absolutely.
Would be preferred versus more or less an industrial area being provided with some ancillary benefits. We've got a couple of gas stations and a couple of food and beverage locations and some industrial development out on that side of town.
But in addition to that, because that will grow as our community grows. But in addition to that, it's the piece of having people really see what makes us unique. And it's not Corbin Park, it is the river, but we have a lot of other opportunities around the river. From a city point of view, as commissioners that give advice on what would be the best, and from a marketing point of view too, Corbin just has too many other issues. I'm concerned about the neighbors in the area. I'm concerned about, some of our future plans to keep it just a really wonderful park that it has been for so many decades.
Right.
And anyway, so it gives you enough to move forward on?
I think it does. The one piece that I'd still like to get a little more dialogue on is the value of our parkland as it relates to these public-private partnerships.
Right.
How does the commission see that value of our parkland as it relates to selling off or leasing back to a private entity an area of a facility or an amenity within a facility to be able to so for them to pursue private gain. You know, where do you see that offset? Is the 8% kind of landed on that not necessarily being something we see as favorable in this scenario? Where would that play out?
Once if we do enter into something like this, then we're setting a precedent for future partnerships for other parks, especially the sports complex that we're going to be developing. So we have to do it right. So it's an excellent question. I would never want to see us sell our land. Leasing it would be potentially fine. I don't know all the obstacles that can come in the way until we look at that, but I don't know. It's a tough one because they will be taking up a long area.
Yeah, what exactly is the size?
I didn't see the acreage, but this is a huge proposal. So
Yeah, my guess is the footprint that they're proposing is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 12 acres.
That's what I thought.
They're overhead above 10 or 12 acres. And when I looked at the development that they have with Tacoma Metro Parks, in that facility is at one of their regional zoos. So there's a lot of other traffic coming in. That's what they said. This price is in addition to your access to the location. So that they're charging for this amenity after you already gain access to the park. So say you go to Silverwood, you pay to get into the park, and then in addition, you would pay to get on this.
It's like Triple
amenity.
Play. Triple Play has an indoor thing that you would pay in addition to.
Right. So that's the model that's happening at Tacoma Metro, and that's what's working for them, and I'm sure that their negotiation all plays into that. They've invested in some of those nature-based playgrounds within and around these two elements to kind of bridge those elements so that you have a nature-based play area that introduces children into some of these kind of activities that feel like they're risky, but still in a kind of constrained and safe environment within a children's play area. So they've kind of bridged that at that location. Plus, they're exposing them to all of those nature and educational elements within a zoo. So I think it's really a great model that's working there.
But I was going to say, you guys have obviously had the discussion that Corbin's not the best fit. So have you just amongst yourselves talked about other parks that there were possibilities? I mean, you said Black Bay, that you had some ideas there.
Yeah, we had some brief discussion about Black Bay. We're having, once again, some drought stress related issues and some insect infestations out there that I have some concern with forest management and how that would relate and interact with something like this. Right now, we're getting ready to embark on a master planning process for Black Bay. So we don't really have a full development like we do for Corbin, where we have a vision for what that space will become. And without having that from an administrative standpoint, it's a little harder to say, yes, this is what's been vetted within our community, and this is what direction we want this space to become for our city 50, 100 years down the road. And trying to make this sort of call for that space right now is a little harder. Kiwanis Park, we have a MOU with the Kiwanis Club that allows us to run a camp out there already, so we already have some more intensive recreation elements at that site. As far as a weekend perspective goes, the park's fairly busy as it is, and we'll fill up on the weekends. Weekday, at the start and finish of camp, it's really full.
Right.
But it has adequate parking to be able to accommodate something like this, to be able to get 30, 40 cars in at a time throughout the day and transition those elements over. So that lends itself to being favorable in those ways. Some of the other built environment that's there within the clubhouse, if that became part of that lease agreement, maybe then there's some additional value and a reduced cost for them. And if that can play into our camp, all the better. But all of that's based on conversations that haven't had with the owner of the property. So whether or not we'd want to even, or they would want to pursue something like this, we haven't had that conversation.
And again, that's Kiwanis Park is in neighborhoods. That you
It
have
is.
to, you know. So have you looked at Chameleon? Have you had a brief conversation? I know there's so much happening with that land accusation too that, you know, I don't know what the timing is, but.
Right. Timing, I think, would be key there, and then the other element that we'd have to consider is the developed portion of Chameleon near the parking facilities that could accommodate this sort of use relatively easily, and also provide us with some additional benefits of being able to run team building activities within the trailhead. So we'd have additional weekdays support that we may be able to coordinate. One other advantage I see of that location, all of that is on Vista-owned land. So then we have to bring in that conversation, and I think 6 months is going to make it really, really difficult to try to make all of this happen within this sort of a timeline at those locations. Not that I don't see, I see Chameleon as a very viable option for something like this, or even this sort of an element. It's just there's a couple of hurdles to work through, and if it's worth it, let's go after it. And it definitely supports that downtown business.
Yeah, it does.
But part of your question is, you know, where do we want to head with kind of the public-private partnership? And it seems, I get the read here that we want to be very selective. You know, if it enters into a 20-year lease obligation with a private entity, it's got to be something that's clearly comfortable with you and with this group, or we pass.
Council, legal, insurance.
I mean, where it's located.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing, how that impacts. It seems to me like you might be able to find the perfect spot for it, but we don't have to do it.
Just need more questions answered.
We do, I think, which is just going to create more questions, you know, on that, but it helps us narrow down. Have we provided you with enough information to?
I think we've got a good starting point.
And that's what it is.
Yes.
So that 6-month, you know, timeline is like, ooh, to me, it's like, I'm not even looking at the 6 months because it is a beginning conversation.
Yeah.
So, and we are always very appreciative of staff's feedback. I know a lot of times Dave will lob something out for us to comment on, but it's important for us to get all the information. And so it is important for you guys to really let us know kind of what you've been discussing. And I think this has been a good dialogue, is what I'm saying. I'd like to see you do more of that.
That's good. All right.
Okay.
Any other items of discussion on that?
I think it's an exciting potential, you know, but at what cost? And that's what we're looking at, I think. Anyone else have another closing comment on that? Okay. Staff and committee reports. We're moving forward.
All right. So the staff report we had was kind of an update on where we're at with Sportsman's Park, and quick picture of that pickleball court out at Beck before
Looks
I go
great.
there. So just thought I'd sneak that in since it was part of the discussion today. And this was also part of the repair work that was done as a part of that contract when we brought in our tennis and pickleball court surfacing company. They made a repair to this court at Black Bay. This is an issue that we see pretty regular. We'll watch it this spring. This was a repair that was done fairly late in the year, so we wanted to try to get a window of what's happening in one freeze-thaw cycle, so that we can get a picture of whether or not we need to be planning on this every year in the spring, or if it can still extend to 3 years. This was 3 years after the last round of repairs, and most of those were out here in this lighter colored surfacing. So, Sportsman's Park, we had 3 phases of development. We moved forward with our phase 1 and phase 2 of the development, and phase 1 was generally the area along Lucas Road, which is shown here. these 30-some parking stalls and then side of the road parking stalls on both sides of the roadway. All of this roadway is actually within the Sportsman's Park parcel. So the parcel line actually sits generally on the back of the sidewalk adjacent to the St. George's Church. Phase 2 was generally parking improvements along 19th, and those parking improvements provided an 88 parking stall with an access route to the pickleball courts that were installed a number of years ago. Also included in Phase 2 were some hardscape elements in and around the spectator areas on Brett James. And then Phase 3 in the future is our proposed improvements along 21st and include a multi-use path within the park to a crosswalk entering into Sportsman's, and then bike lane facilities, curb gutter, bike lane facilities, and then sidewalk along Sportsman's as well. These were pushed back partially due to funding and then partially due to Avista has a gas line replacement they're going to be doing in the area. We didn't want to have a conflict with those improvements. So even some of our Phase 2 improvements, we pulled those back slightly to the south so that we didn't conflict with those and have new infrastructure that was just going to be torn up in the next year as Avista begins to do their gas line replacement. So that's the bulk of what was planned for this facility. The other part of it was while we're in here doing this major construction or reconstruction of our parking facilities, we took the opportunity to upgrade some irrigation infrastructure within the fields themselves, and we're modifying the root zone within the fields as well, so that hopefully we can get more play on wet, rainy days. 19th Street has had a history of having rainouts because the grass has standing water, not necessarily because the dirt is too wet. And me being in Post Falls for a long time, I have some of the history as to why that was the case. And I guess I'm getting a chance now to go back in and fix what I did when I was 12. So that this shows what we were dealing with the parking facility up there prior to these improvements. I'll just kind of fly through this. This is just a typical weekday evening game at Sportsman's. So this is 19th Street. We now have 12 parking stalls that sit along this side, plus we'll continue to be able to park along this curb depending on what happens with the development of these lots that are now for sale that sit just south of the park. There's once again 19th Street facing the other direction, so you can see where those parking facilities have now gone in, and if you drive up there now, you'll see those improvements in place. We've got sidewalk that comes in along this side. We've got some fencing improvements that are going to be going in over the winter so that the facility will be ready for play in the spring. And then here's a picture of those irrigation improvements that are going in as well. So then our parking facility looking north along Lucas. We're going to do a demonstration garden, if you will, a stormwater demonstration, or demonstration, easy enough for me to say, with a biovegetated swale. So typically those in our area are turf grass and pretty intensive water users for the bulk of our summer when we don't have a lot of rainwater. The purpose of these swales is to separate the oils and other materials that are along our roadway as a result of operating cars, separate those things so they don't end up in our groundwater. So we're going to be installing some plant-based materials that will serve that same function and hopefully reduce our overall weekly maintenance. Not that it'll necessarily reduce our overall maintenance for the year, because there are still maintenance inputs that are required for those planting beds, especially in areas like this where you get pretty high concentrations of weed seeds being deposited as a result of stormwater carrying those seeds down and depositing them in those soils that are pretty desirable environments for plants to establish. But it's going to be a unique project for us in our community. There's one other developer that's currently doing that. I believe it's the development that's going in along Idaho, just north of Poline at the old Prairie Falls fairway, basically, that it's being redeveloped. I believe there's a portion of that they're doing this sort of infrastructure. We're also able to extend ADA and pedestrian connectivity and repair a section of sunken curb that was causing or sunken sidewalk that was presenting itself with a trip hazard on the east side of the site. Once again, still within the park parcel, but functions more or less like a roadway. We did partner with our streets crew, and I'd like to give them a big applaud for the partnership that we had there that helped save the costs and save the taxpayers some dollars on the paving portion of this project. We did have to contract out for curbing and gutter and sidewalk and our concrete flat work, and as well as our major excavation. But being able to do the paving at just the cost of the asphalt and the cost of the rock base is huge. And they were awesome to work with on this project, and we're thrilled to be able to have that sort of a working relationship with our streets crew. And yeah, excited to work with the new streets superintendent over there, and Paul's been great to work with, and our park workers. You can see one green shirt down here on the day we were paving. They were out raking hot asphalt too. So that's where we're at. We'll be continuing on that improvement. And the big thing we wanted to make sure the commission was aware of is that because of those improvements on the internal portions of the field, we're going to be waiting for root zones to establish within the new sod that goes in the spring. And so we'll see some delays on opening those fields in the spring. The largest person that will be impacted by that in our area is actually going to be adult baseball. Brett James Field is the only 90-foot baseball field that City of Post Falls Parks operates. That's our only 90-foot baseball field. There are 3 90-foot baseball fields within the school district, 2 at the high school. One that's in great shape is used on a daily basis in the spring by the high school, and one that's used heavily for practices but has some room for improvement. And then there's a field at Ponderosa Elementary. Ponderosa Field, the outfield fences are relatively short where there are fences. And once again, the high school's using that facility heavily for their freshman leagues. So those three fields are generally taken up entirely by the school district use. And so until we get Brett James back up and running, that's going to be a little bit of a niche that's going to be having a lack of service in our area. And then the other user that generally uses the Sportsman's complex is our Post Falls Little League organization. They use 19th rather heavily for gameplay, and they will definitely be impacted at some level because of this improvement as well. So we're doing what we can to try to get everything done. We're actually waiting for the ground to freeze so we can get out there and work on it a little bit more, because things are a little too muddy at the moment. And we're hoping that when things freeze, we can actually get out and set our grades with that root zone material, wait for them to thaw, and then finish prep our grades, and then get in and sod. So we're kind of playing the weather game. If it either dries out, great, we'll get to work on it, or if it freezes, great, we'll get to work on it. And then fencing. Fencing will be ongoing throughout the winter.
Any questions about staff report? Okay, thank you, Brian. Commissioner comments? Any commissioner comments?
For me.
No exciting Thanksgiving stories or anything? Okay, well, seeing that there's no executive session either, I adjourn this meeting.